Well, Christmas is coming early. This is something to give me hope in what has otherwise been a bleak season as a Manchester United fan. City's poor run continuing with a 2-0 away loss to Juventus. And this was a Juventus team that came in mixed form. They've only lost one game all season, but it feels like they've drawn every other one. And they were both in need of a result to keep their dreams of automatic qualification out of the Champions League and the top eight alive. City's position now leaving them pretty bleak, pretty far down in the table, as they're on the cusp of potentially even falling out of the playoff zone in the league phase, and with an away game against PSG next. And as much as I know people don't really rate PSG, when you're on the form that City are in, every game looks tough, and you'd have said that coming into the Juventus game that you think City should win, and they haven't. And it's becoming a bit too predictable now. It's becoming a bit too same old stuff. You're seeing teams approach games against City in a fairly consistent manner. You're not surprised by the approach anymore, which is maybe the most damning thing of all, really. And fair play to Juventus, they had a game plan. Thiago Motta pulled it off expertly and well and truly deserved the result. But we're going to go over how they prevented City from scoring. So in City's first stage of build-up, Juve would press high, they'd press aggressively, they'd go man-to-man and try and prevent City from playing. Where City could get an advantage was Ederson being the spare man, making that back three a back four, as Kyle Walker would move into more of an orthodox right-back position, Ruben Diaz and Gvardiol surrounding Ederson as Rico Lewis inverted into midfield alongside Gundogan. De Bruyne and Grealish high up in the 10 positions, Bernardo Silva wide right, Doku on the left and Haaland up top. And as I just said, Juve would counter this by going man-to-man. It would be Vlahovic on Diaz, Yildiz and Conceição coming in from the midfield line to mark and press the wide centre-backs, Locatelli pushing up from his deeper midfield base to mark Rico Lewis and Koopmeiners on Gundogan. Thuram would mark Kevin De Bruyne with Danilo and Savona marking the wingers, and Kalulu would be left on Haaland, and Gatti would move from his centre-back base to equal the numbers on Jack Grealish. Where City could look to get an advantage through not just the extra man of Ederson would be when Conceição and Yildiz would go full press. You'd see Grealish almost coming into a left back position. Walker could then push up into more of an orthodox right back position, with Gvardiol collecting the ball from Ederson, and turn into a sort of 2-4 from City. And this then tested, I guess, how far Gatti was willing to come to try and press Grealish and win the ball off of him. So he could get on the ball here, turn and play forward. But to be fair, and this is coming through Gatti's leadership at the back, who's turning into a fantastic centre-back. Every game I watch him, he gets better and better. You'd see not just him coming up into this area, you'd see Savona coming up from right back to go and press him with Gatti covering across to Jeremy Doku. You'd also see Thuram coming up from De Bruyne to try and mark Grealish, with Savona dropping in. Gatti maybe moving to Kevin De Bruyne, who, with Grealish's position, would come in more centrally anyway, making it a bit more of an easier jump from the defensive line. And again, through leadership, through great organisation from Federico Gatti, it was fantastically pulled off, and it didn't really feel like City had too much space. If that pass was found and he did have a yard, they'd quickly close him down, they'd quickly get into press and play around the corner. You'd sometimes see Kevin De Bruyne coming into this area, or you'd maybe get Kyle Walker pushing on a little bit higher from his fullback position, pin Yildiz back a bit, so that if Ruben Diaz was on the ball, then he could maybe find an angle in between Vlahovic and Yildiz to play it into the inside on Kevin De Bruyne and get it up the pitch that way. To be fair to Juve, they responded to this really well, and that is by dropping into their more settled defensive shape a lot earlier within City's build-up, and that would be, if I just drop this in a little bit, that would be with Locatelli dropping in onto Jack Grealish alongside Thuram in the centre midfield base. You'd get Kalulu and Gatti then doubling up on Erling Haaland, Koopmeiners and Vlahovic dropping on to Rico Lewis and Gundogan, with Yildiz coming in a little bit deeper, just dropping off of Gvardiol and Walker slightly, to try and look after that area, that if Grealish were to pull into it, then he could shadow Grealish while going into press Gvardiol, forcing him back inside. Yildiz could do the same on City's right-hand side, and so they were responsible, they were a lot more diligent, and the space became less and less, and they stuck to their jobs well. The only way that City could really play out efficiently at points was the staggering of Gundogan and Lewis. Gundogan could drop into the defensive line and make it a 4-1, and then this would sort of mess with the positioning of Koopmeiners, and Vlahovic is just a yard off the pace, and he had an angle he could slip through Lewis and they could get the attack going. But that was very rare. To be fair, the recovery of the likes of Koopmeiners and the wide players to get back into position and settle into their more defensive shape was very good, which we'll talk about now. In their more sustained attacking shape, City would move into the sort of 3-box-4-3. with the same shape they were in the build-up, essentially, and Juve would drop in a little bit deeper, be a little bit more responsible. The centre of the pitch was completely blocked off. The verticality from Juventus was really good, compact, deep, and protecting that central area of the pitch. They couldn't really play through. Only once I can remember De Bruyne getting a bit of space in between the lines to play Haaland through, which produced a good save from Di Gregorio. Other than that, they were forced out wide into the likes of Silva coming into these areas as Yildiz and Conceição would tuck in a little bit more. And it was a struggle for City to create through the wide areas as well, as when the ball would go to Silva and go to Doku, you'd have Danilo jumping out and the centre midfielder on this side making sure that that half space was covered in. So if it was Danilo, it would be Thuram covering. If it was Savona, it would be Locatelli covering rather. And so the half space runs that City are known for under Pep Guardiola weren't a thing. They couldn't find those runs. The midfielders did their jobs excellently. The wide player would get back into double up on the winger, and as a result, they'd then have to take the easy pass backward to Kyle Walker showing it in this position, where they could look to restart. If Thuram or Locatelli got dragged into the half space, Coot Miners would be more than diligent in his work defensively, recovering into shape and just restricting that area from becoming an issue from a Juventus point of view. It was fantastic work, fantastically disciplined from Juventus, and as always, not having Haaland to play into was an issue because with De Bruyne and Grealish, they were easily outnumbered with Koop Miners and Locatelli staying on him. Conceição and Yildiz managing the space really well. They almost needed that extra option of a player coming in and just breaking through the middle of them to provide an option to feet. Did it probably once or twice. Other than that, was a fairly static figure, and I just think, look, we get what he is. He's not an all-round great player. He's the most functional footballer on the planet. But these moments where you just need to provide a little bit of an overload, just a little bit of an extra option to take advantage, because Grealish and De Bruyne could spread Thuram and Locatelli pretty wide. That option to play it into feet should be available, and it should be on more. He should be willing to pin back Kalulu, who he has a size advantage over, to then keep it under control, look for the runs of Grealish, look for the runs of De Bruyne. Professional football player at the highest level, I don't think that's too much of an ask to implement into his skill set. And so as a result, City were pretty toothless first half, and in the second half, Juve got a lot deeper. They knew there was going to be more high-intensity running, with City trying to pile on the pressure, and so they would go in with a back five almost immediately, whether it be Thuram dropping into these areas to fill in gaps in between the back four, Koop Miners dropping in to make it a 5-4-1, and again, just defensively a lot more solid, and City found them really hard to break down. The only place they really got chances away was on the edge of the box, because Juve just had that box so crowded, they found it difficult to find space to get a shot away, or just anything away. But as a result, nothing that really troubled Di Gregorio. One good save in the second half from a shot from range, and that was about it. And the biggest issue that this came from was a transitional point of view from a Manchester City perspective, because Rico Lewis would get forward a lot more as well in search for that goal. Gvardiol and Walker a little bit spread, and it left Gundogan as the sole holder midfielder. We don't need to go over how just poor Gundogan has been in that role and how his lack of mobility and physicality is a hindrance, because it's been talked about everywhere. But with Doku, with Silva, with Grealish, I'm going to leave De Bruyne out of it because I felt like he was the one that was using his composure and his quality to try and open up Juventus, but he can't do it on his own. How much Doku especially, but just gave the ball away in these areas, and when you do that and you don't have the mobility in your midfield to protect on the counter-attack, the more you lose the ball, the more you're having to run backwards. And Juventus in that second half were counter-attacking brilliantly, and each time the recovery runs of those forward players got worse and worse and worse. And at points you'd maybe get Rico Lewis in a good position to drop back into left back, but there were so many times where you'd see the high intensity runs come from these players: Conceição, Yildiz, Koop Miners, Locatelli, and Vlahovic getting forward. Even Gatti, when he won the ball for the first goal and laid it off and continued his run into the box, powerful runs, taking that front five at least out the game completely. And Gundogan just couldn't deal with the space at all. The defensive line would have to drop back in quick to prevent the space coming from in behind. That line between defence and midfield becomes stretched, it becomes bigger, it becomes more of an issue for City to deal with, and just gave away chase on the counter-attack. If Gundogan committed, which he did a couple of times, there we go, spaces left, and Juve could play through and run through. As I say, it was done for the first, Weston McKennie and Timothy Weah did for the second goal, counter-attacking on him for fun. And that's not to say that Juve were even perfect in attack, really, either, because I thought there were some really poor individual moments at points, especially in the first half. They would try and build out in the 2-4-4. City would look to press high, but they would look to press with five and leave five at the back, which as a result leaves them with a -1 and -2 when they got Di Gregorio involved. Haaland would try and press the centre-backs with Grealish, Doku, De Bruyne and Silva on their man in that sort of midfield four line. They would try and press the spare man if he became available by shielding the pass into their marker. And if it was pushed over to one side, so let's say Gatti receiving it in this position, De Bruyne would come across, Silva would come across, Haaland would come across, and they try and squeeze him over to this side of the pitch or that side of the pitch, wherever the direction of play was intended. The press was decent, it wasn't excellent. Gundogan would stay deeper to try and mark Coop Miners. One area they did get a bit of luck in, Juve, was Locatelli dropping in a little bit deeper into the defensive line and receiving the ball and using his passing ability to either spread it to Danilo on the far side, who could then look to play forward, or producing a lovely long-range pass to one of those forward three players. And it was brilliant at just making sure Juventus got up the pitch as quickly and as efficiently as possible, did Locatelli, or finding the wide areas. And they had so many targets to hit. In certain ways. So with Koopmeiners and Vlahovic, you had the physicality that they could both look to use on Gundogan by dropping in a little bit more, Vlahovic dropping in, which he did after about half an hour. I thought for the first half an hour you wouldn't have noticed Vlahovic was on the pitch. As the game wore on, he started dropping in, he started looking for the ball in counter-attacking or in attacking situations, using his physicality to hold off, laying the ball off, playing it out wide, and became more of a threat. If he can produce that type of performance more consistently, then we're looking at a good striker. He's so anonymous a lot of the time. Coop Miners as well, using his physicality, because he is a pretty physical player, to beat Gundogan in these areas. The only problem was Coop Miners could not pass wind, and some of his quality on the ball was, I thought, horrifically bad. Defensively, I thought he was outstanding. I think 10 out of 10 defensively. Attacking-wise, it was bad. And I also think that there is an issue with Yildiz and Conceição, who I think are two really good players for Juventus. I think they're two technically top-draw players. They keep the ball at their feet brilliantly. But that's kind of the problem, is they both want it to feet. And so let's just say when they were found with a pass from deep, from Locatelli or whoever, and they had the ball, they weren't looking for that run. They weren't looking to test the space in between Walker and Diaz or Gvardiol and Lewis. They were constantly looking for it out wide and weren't dribbling it down the line. They'd take it inside and they'd find space on the inside because of how good they are with the ball at the feet, and they do have pace. But again, when Yildiz or Conceição came inside, you wouldn't see, as the City defence shifted across, you wouldn't see this. You wouldn't see this movement from the player to then find the ball in behind. They'd still remain out wide, looking for the switch of play to then attack the fullback. And as good as they are technically, they're fantastic footballers. Both needed each other to make movements that they themselves weren't making. And it just felt like they both needed something to play. They're fantastic footballers, but when you're not making those runs and you're looking for the ball a lot deeper, you're killing your own counter-attack. And as a result, then they'd have to play the safe option. They'd have to go back to Vlahovic, to Coop Miners. Coop Miners, who, as I said, kept losing the ball. Thuram, I feel like a bit too easily saying no to the more advanced passing option to play it safe and play it deep, killing their own counter-attack. Some poor decision-making in that first half especially, and Juve could have been ahead before half-time. There was so many just little poor moments, little poor moments, not being brave enough on the ball, not attacking space where space is. Now, it did improve when Timothy Weah came on, who is a direct attacking threat, who will look to get in behind, who will look to make movements between a defence or outside that will hurt him, as was shown for the second goal, with McKennie's burst of pace from a counter-attacking position, and Timothy Weah getting in behind, producing a 1-2 that got Juventus that killer second goal. And to be fair, fantastic substitutions from Thiago Motta, who balanced the game out really well and managed it from minute 1 to minute 90, and you've got to give him full credit for that. But the City, the same old issues present again. And oh God, Manchester derby on Sunday, I'm so nervous for it. Because as a United fan, I'm going into this game thinking, this should be winnable. This should be, with how easy they are to play against, we should feel like we have a chance. But this is United we're talking about, and at the minute that the unpredictable is the predictable, and the easy becomes the difficult. So we'll see. It's going to be an interesting game regardless, but I'd love to know what you guys think, and like the video if you like it, dislike it if you disliked it, comment down below and tell me why either way, and subscribe if you want to see more. In a bit, lads.